the hottest guys being picked up on the waiver wires. Obviously, after his huge performance, Derek Anderson, one of the many, but so too after Monday night, Jason Campbell, he's also on that list. Wes Welker, Sammy Morris, both from the Patriots. Sean McDonald's from the Lions, having a good start to the season. He's being picked up, and so too is Joe Juravicius after that big game with Derek Anderson. Hey, how are you, folks? Jason Horowitz, glad to have Jamey Eisenberg up here in New York for Move Makers as part of the Fantasy Football Series on CBSSports.com. And, of course, you can read your waiver wire article on CBSSports.com. Add something to that waiver wire article. What did we miss there?
I'll tell you what, Kevin Jones may come back this week, and that could be a guy that's going to be picked up a lot simply because, hey, it's Kevin Jones, Lions offense, Tatum Bell, good first week, so-so second week. TJ Duncan not getting it done. Could be the Kevin Jones show pretty soon.
And Kevin Jones, before, obviously, the injury before this year, not so much because of the injury, but he certainly was a second-tier running back. So certainly a guy that would definitely be gone just like that. And we'll see how he can do, especially in that Lions offense. All right, let's get into Derek Anderson. We referenced it in Who's Hot, Who's Not. Obviously, one of the hotter quarterbacks right behind Carson Palmer. But if you look at Derek Anderson fantasy numbers, he is the fifth-rated fantasy quarterback. Now, I know that's skewed because of what happened
one game.
In Week 2 and not in Week 1. But you notice who's not on that list. Peyton Manning is not on that list. Derek Anderson, after Week 2, is ahead of Peyton Manning. Now, Jamey, explain why fantasy users should get excited about Derek Anderson.
Well, you get excited about Derek Anderson because of Kellen Winslow, because of Braylon Edwards, because, as we talked about on Tuesday with Jamal Lewis starting to run the ball, you like the fact that, especially this week against Oakland, a little bit of a favorable schedule here and there. It's unfortunate they don't play the Bengals again until Week 16 because, hey, he likes the Bengals. The thing that concerns you, though, is he wasn't touched against Cincinnati. No sacks and 33 pass attempts. And the fact, again, Cincinnati's defense. But Brady Quinn, at any point, could be stuck in there if the Browns start to lose. So I think you look at Anderson. If you're hurting now with Chad Pennington, with Steve McNair, J.P. Lossman, some potential backup guys, Alex Smith, maybe you give Anderson a chance as the bye weeks start to approach, and if you have an injury situation that's hurting your team. But I would probably stay away from Anderson until he starts to prove this for a couple of weeks.
And we'll see if Anderson can continue to get rid of the football, because that's one of the reasons they got rid of Charlie Fry. Anderson only took one sack against the Steelers in his 2.5 quarters in Week 1 as well. All right, you talked about backups. Let's get into some other backups here that may not be performing as well. These are guys that are obviously starters in the league, but backup in your fantasy league for the most part. Do you advise on keeping any of these guys as we start approaching the bye weeks come Week 4?
Well, I think certainly Phillip Rivers. You know, the schedule was brutal. You know, Chicago Week 1, New England Week 2. That's a tough way to go. You know, I think he'll start getting better as Norv Turner's influence starts to get in there, and obviously as LaDainian Tomlinson starts to run the ball, because that's a huge detriment to his passing game if they're not able to get the ball moving on the ground. But he's got Antonio Gates. I still think Vincent Jackson will be a part at some point this year in terms of fantasy production and getting in the NFL production, as well, just being a playmaker. So I think you look at Phillip Rivers as the guy, and I think Alex Smith eventually will come around as well. Speaking of Norv Turner, he loses Turner as his offensive coordinator, and that's a huge loss. So, Alex Smith also, Vernon Davis, Darrell Jackson will start to get involved. Maybe Arnez Battle if you still trust him, but Frank Gore also as the running game starts to get going there.
From a fantasy perspective, not so great to start, but from a football perspective, if you're a 49ers fan, you're very happy that they're 2-0, even though they're not scoring very many points. All right, give me a couple backups, just a couple names that you would advise maybe picking up if you need a backup. Maybe David Garrard?
David Garrard, if you're in leagues where interceptions don't count, Trent Green, because they're going to be throwing the ball. Jason Campbell had a decent game last night. I think he'll start to get better. And you know what? Jeff Garcia, no interceptions so far. And if Joey Galloway can keep playing like this, if that offensive line holds up, and if they can start to run the ball with Cadillac, he may have some potential. I don't know if I would say start these guys, but you can start maybe to look at them as the bye weeks approach.
All right, let's get into the Patriots situation. Obviously, their quarterback is all set to go, Tom Brady. You don't have to worry about him unless he gets hurt, and then the entire team has to worry. But their receivers, it's a situation where people would have thought that it would have been Dante Stallworth, and we'll see what happens with Randy Moss, Wes Welker, we'll see. But it goes Randy Moss 1, Wes Welker 2, and Dante Stallworth a distant 3. Is he a guy worth hanging on to right now?
I think he is, because I think at some point they're going to start to get him the ball. Tom Brady is very good at, if a guy is not being involved, he will involve him in the offense. But remember, Ben Watson is still there. Maroney, as we talked about Tuesday, really didn't get going yet, and I think he will. So that'll probably open things up a little bit more. But, it's Randy Moss 1, Wes Welker 2, and really nobody else 3 at this point, and maybe outside of Watson in the red zone. But, I think Stallworth at some point will start to get going.
I'm sure Trent Green wishes he had Wes Welker because he was fantastic in Miami. They let him go for way too little. Fantastic possession receiver. All right, speaking of that, let's talk about slot receivers here, because these are some guys that may start to get some numbers. Bobby Ingram's always a good football player. Fantasy-wise, it's always a little iffy because there's a lot of weapons in Seattle. But Drew Bennett You talked about him in the offseason about how Isaac Bruce and the rest of the St. Louis team has really liked him and thinks he's going to be a great weapon for them. Of that list, do you think he and Brandon Stokely will be valuable for fantasy users?
I think Anthony Gonzalez as well, just because of that offense and the fact that we remember what Stokely did when he was with the Colts in 2004. Stokely, I think, is going to be a great play as Jay Cutler continues to get better, especially with Brandon Marshall and Javon Walker on the outside. Stokely will continue to do what he's done, 3-4 catches, 60, 70 yards, maybe around that range, which will be, very good, especially, again, bye weeks coming up, a guy you can use. But Drew Bennett, I spoke to Mark Bolger this offseason, loves him in the red zone. We haven't seen that yet because they haven't had the chance to use him, but Drew Bennett can be very good as the season goes on.
And he's also had that injury, speaking of Drew Bennett, that he's trying to overcome. But I agree with you. Drew Bennett, he was very good in Tennessee without any other help. Now we'll see what he can do in St. Louis. One last thing about those receivers. Glenn Holt came in for the Bengals, replacing Tab Perry as the number 3 receiver. If Perry continues to have to sit out with the injury, does Holt have any value?
Well, for a couple weeks, because we know Chris Henry's going to come back after Week 8. So I think, I would let it see how it plays out, see how he does. But again, when you have a great quarterback like Carson Palmer, you want to get as many of his receivers as you can. We know T.J. Houshmandzadeh and Chad Johnson. Yeah. If you can get the third guy there, not a bad way to go.
All right, Jamey, one last piece of advice that involves the tight ends. What is it for Week 3?
It's start anybody against the Giants. As we see, Donald Lee scores, Bubba Frank scores. This week, I think you're going to see Chris Cooley with a big game. He scored Monday night against the Eagles. I think this will start to be a good week for Chris Cooley, and I like Marcus Pollard this week as well, just because, again, we're seeing against what the Bengals gave up, and I think this could be a good week for Marcus Pollard.
Now, if you have a tight end that is already good, maybe not play Marcus Pollard because he was held without a catch against the Arizona Cardinals, but he could be a good player this week because the Bengals' Todd Heap and Kellen Winslow have absolutely destroyed those two teams. All right, folks, that'll do it for Move Makers here on CBSSports.com. But for Stardom Situm, well, you can check that out from Florida later this week. And, of course, it's the best matchups heading into Week 3. For Jamey Eisenberg, I'm Jason Horowitz. Take care, folks.